A Christmas Carol.
Marley was dead to begin with. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. There is no doubt that Marley was dead, and this must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. Scrooge never painted out Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, Scrooge, sometimes Marley. But he answered to both. He was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it out 1 degree at Christmas. Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breast and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. Candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who was in a dismal little cell beyond copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was much smaller, so small that it looked like it had but 1 coal. He couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. The clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle. God save you.
It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach.
Ah, humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle. You don't mean that, I am sure.
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come, then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Ah, humbug.
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart as should.
Uncle!
Nephew! Keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it? But you don't keep it.
Well, leave me alone, then. Much good may it do you, much good it has ever done you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited. I dare say Christmas among the rest. But I'm sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round. Apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, it's a good time. A kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of when men and women seem to be by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as though they really were fellow passengers to the grave. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say God bless it.
Let me hear another sound from you and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You are quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder you don't go into Parliament.
Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Oh, for Pete's sakes. Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party. I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon.
And a Happy New Year.
Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially.
There's another fellow, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam.
In letting Scrooge's nephew out, he had let another in.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we would make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Ha! Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill in Porlar and Fulverger, then, right?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, well, I was afraid from what you had said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course.
Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What should I put you down for?
Nothing.
Oh, you wish to be anonymous?
No, I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, sir, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry either. I help to establish the establishments I have mentioned. They cost plenty enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Well, many can't go there, and many would rather die.
Well, if they would rather die, they'd better do it then, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that.
But you might know it.
Well, it's not my business. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, sir.
The fog and darkness thickened. People ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages. The brightness of the shops made pale faces ruddy as they passed. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose.
It's quite convenient, sir.
Well, it's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work.
But, sir, it's only once a year.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Just be here all the earlier the next morning.
The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling, ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could to play at Blindman's Bluff. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on Scrooge's chamber door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face. It was not impenetrable shadow, but had a dismal light about it. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. Its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part or its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, suddenly it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it. as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, so he said,
"Boo-boo,"
and he closed it with a bang. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly, too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. All as they should be, nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in the dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not normally his custom. Thus secured against surprise, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel.
Humbug!
Scrooge walked across the room. His glance happened upon a bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted a half a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below. Scrooge remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open, and the noise grew much louder, drawing closer and closer still.
It's humbug still. I won't believe it.
His color changed, though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door, and it passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost!" and fell again. The same face, Marley in his pigtail, waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle and wound about him like a tail. It was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent so that Scrooge could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Though he looked at the phantom through and through, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you, then? You're particular for a shade.
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Well, can you sit down?
I can.
Do it, then.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Well, because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge held on tight to his chair. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast.
Mercy! Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
I do, I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness.
You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You've labored on it since. It's a ponderous chain.
Jacob, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me.
You must have been very slow about it, Jacob.
Slow?
7 years dead and traveling all the time.
The whole time. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse.
So you travel fast.
On the wings of the wind.
You might have gotten over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
Oh, captive bound and double ironed, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Oh, yet such was I. Oh, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to the poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Hear me, my time is nearly gone.
I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob.
Pray, how is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see? I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. That is no light part of my penance. I'm here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring, Ebenezer.
You were always a good friend to me. Thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the specter reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped in surprise and fear. Confused noises filled the air. Incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The specter, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperately in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts undisturbed. He tried to say, but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside. Scrooge, starting up, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet as like an old man. viewed through some supernatural medium which gave him the appearance of being receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. From the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light by which all of this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using in its duller moments a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past.
Scrooge made bold to inquire what business brought him there.
Your welfare.
Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but thought that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately,
Your reclamation, then. Take heed, rise, and walk with me.
But I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand upon my heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this.
They passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. It was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground.
Good heaven, I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
Why, your lip is trembling. And what is that upon your cheek? You recollect the way.
Remember it, I could walk it blindfold.
Strange to have forgotten for it so many years. Let us go on.
They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, shaggy ponies trotting toward them with boys upon their backs who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it.
These are but shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
The travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still.
They approached a mansion of dull red brick. The ghost and Scrooge moved toward a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room. At one desk, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down and wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt and leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood.
It's dear old Ali Baba. Yes, I know. One Christmas time when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come just like that. Oh, poor boy. And Valentine, his wild brother Orson, there they go. And what's his name who was put down in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus? Don't you see him?
Then he said, in pity for his former self,
Oh, poor boy. I wish, but it's too late now.
What is the matter?
Nothing. There were some boys singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given them something.
Let us see another Christmas.
Scrooge's former self grew larger, and the room became darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling. How all this was brought about, Scrooge knew not. He only knew that it was quite correct and that everything had happened so he was alone yet again. Scrooge looked at the ghost and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and embraced him anxiously.
Dear, dear brother, I have come to bring you home, dear brother, to bring you home, home, home.
Home, oh, my little fan.
Home for good and all, home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said yes, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man, and are to never come back here. But first we're to be together all the Christmas long, and have the merriest time in the world.
You're quite a woman, little fan.
She clapped her hands and laughed, tried to touch his head, and instead stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness toward the door.
Always a delicate creature, with a breath might have withered, but she had a large heart.
So she had. You're right, I will not gainsay it, Spirit, God forbid.
She died a woman, and had, as I think, children.
One child.
Your nephew.
Yes.
They had but that moment left the school behind them. They were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. Shadowy passengers passed, shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way. Yes, it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lit up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it? I apprenticed here. Oh, why, it's old Fezziwig, bless his heart. It's Fezziwig alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat.
Yo-ho there, Ebenezer. Dick!
Scrooge's former self, now a grown young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Oh, Dick Wilkins, to be sure. Bless me, yes. There he is. He was very much attached to me. Oh, was poor Dick. Poor Dick.
You, my boys, no more work tonight. It's Christmas Eve. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson.
They charged into the street with the shutters and had them up in their places, came back before you knew it, panting like racehorses.
Hi-ho! Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hi-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer!
Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. In came a fiddler, and in came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning the rest, he instantly began again. When the clock struck 11, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear.
A small matter to make these silly folks look so full of gratitude.
Small?
Why? Is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. Is it that so much he deserves this praise?
Oh, heavens, it isn't that. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
What is the matter?
No, nothing in particular.
Oh, something, I think.
No, I should like to be able to say a word or two with my clerk just now, that's all.
His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air.
My time grows short. Quick now.
Again, Scrooge saw himself older, a man in the prime of life. He had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eyes. He was not alone, but sat side by side with a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past.
It matters to you very little. Another idol has displaced me. And if I can cheer and comfort you in time to come as I would have tried to, I have no just cause to grieve.
What idol has displaced you?
A golden one.
This is the even-handed dealing of the world. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty. There is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
You fear the world too much. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion of gain engrosses you. Have I not?
What then? Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you, am I?
Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You're changed. When it was made, you were another man.
I was a boy.
Your feeling tells you that you are not what you are. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you.
Release me? Have I ever sought release?
In words, no, never.
Well, in what then?
In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?
Oh,
no.
You think not?
I would gladly think otherwise if I could, heaven knows. When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who, in your every confidence with her, weigh everything by gain. Or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. And I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. You know, you may, the memory of what is past half makes me hope you will, have pain in this for a very, very brief time. And you'll dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen.
Oh, Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me so?
One shadow more.
No more, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more.
But the relentless ghost forced him to observe what happened next. They were in a room. Not a very large or handsome room, but full of comfort. Near the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw Belle, now a comely matron, sitting opposite. Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and had been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed.
Belle, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon.
Oh, really? Who was it?
Well, guess.
I don't know. Mr. Scrooge?
Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat, quite alone in the world, I do believe.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you, these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it. Leave me. Please take me back. Haunt me no longer.
In the struggle, Scrooge observed that the ghost light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep.
You're listening to a live presentation of Charles Dickens' classic tale, A Christmas Carol, live on Oklahoma's first radio station, Supertalk 930 WKY, Oklahoma City.
Scrooge awakened, taken with a violent fit of trembling. He got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. A strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge.
Come in and know me better, man.
Scrooge entered timidly. The spirit's eyes were clear and kind, but he didn't like to meet them.
I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. Oh, you have never seen the likes of me before.
Never.
You've never walked forth with the younger members of my family. For I am so very young, my elder brothers, born in these later years.
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
A tremendous family to provide for, Spirit. Conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe, then.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The house fronts looked black enough and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs. The sky was gloomy and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet was there an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. Soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was.
Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch?
Oh, there is, my own.
Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?
To any kindly given, to a poor one most.
Why to a poor one most?
Because it needs it most.
Spirit, I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment.
Aye.
You would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day on which they could be said to dine at all, wouldn't you?
Aye.
You seek to close these places on the seventh day, and it comes to the same thing.
I seek.
Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family.
There are some upon this earth of yours who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us.
And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe. And on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that! Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays, but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his four-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the baker's goose, quite a goose, and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table.
What has ever got your precious father, then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas by half an hour.
Here's Martha, Mother.
Here's Martha, Mother. Hurry.
There's such a goose.
Oh, why, bless your heart alive, my dear. How late you are.
We'd a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning, Mother.
Well, never mind, so as long as you are come. Sit down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless you.
No, there's Father coming.
Hide, Martha, hide.
Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
Not coming.
Not coming? Not coming upon Christmas Day? How dreadful.
Martha didn't like to see him disappointed. If it were only a joke, so came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
How did little Tim behave?
As good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. and thinks he's the strangest things you've ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple and he might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day. Just who it was who made lame beggars walk and blind man see.
Oh, Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, oh no, kind Spirit, say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Man, if you be man in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked can until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
His active little crutch was hurt upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Master Pete mashed the potatoes with an incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast, but when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Everyone had plenty, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now the plates, being changed by Miss Belinda, Miss Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in ignited brandy and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Merry Christmas.
God bless us, everyone.
He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his and dreaded that Tim might be taken from him.
A toast to Mr. Scrooge. I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
The founder of the feast, indeed! I wish I'd had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
My dear, Christmas Day.
I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt.
The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. It was getting dark and snowing heavily. Scrooge and the Spirit went along the streets. The brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and to be the first to greet them. Down in the west, the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night.
What place is this?
A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth. But they know me, see?
A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced toward it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled round a glowing fire, an old man and woman with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The Spirit did not tarry there, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped with her. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. 2 men watched the light had made a fire that through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. They wished each other a Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder two, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. The ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on and on, until being far away as he told Scrooge from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had had a kinder word for another on that day than on any other day of the year, and had shared to some extent in its festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they had delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the Spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at that nephew with approving affability. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece, by marriage, laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends roared out lustily.
He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live. He believed it, too.
More shame for him, Fred.
He's a comical old fellow, that's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry his own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
I'm sure he's very rich, Fred. At least you always tell me so.
What of that, dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it.
I have no patience with him.
Oh, I have. I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come to dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much of a dinner.
Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner.
After tea, they had some music. Scrooge's niece played well a simple little air which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more and thought that if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindness of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that Scrooge begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guest departed. But this, the spirit said, could not be done.
Oh, here is a game. 1/2 hour, Spirit. Let us stay 1/2 hour, only one.
It was a game called Yes and No. Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answered to their questions yes or no, as the case was. At last, the brother, falling into a similar state, cried out,
I have found it out! I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it?
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
He has given us plenty of merriment, I'm sure, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge.
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nonetheless. Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an inaudible speech. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left the children's 12th night party. When looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray.
Are spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight. At midnight. The time is drawing near.
Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it. Look here.
From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Oh, man, look here. Look, down here.
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves, rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are man's, and yet they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him.
You're listening to a live presentation of Charles Dickens' classic tale, A Christmas Carol, live on Oklahoma's first radio station, Supertalk 930 WKY, Oklahoma City.
The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded.
Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? You're about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit? Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? So be it. Lead on, the night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, Spirit.
The city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. But there they were in the heart of it, on change, amongst the merchants who hurried up and down, chinked the money in their pockets, conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it. Either way, I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
Oh, God knows.
Well, what has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Lent it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't lent it to me. That is all I know. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, for upon my life I don't know anybody to go to it. Suppose we make a party or a volunteer.
Well, I don't mind going. If a lunch is provided, but I must be fed, I'll make one.
Well, I am the most disinterested among you. After all, I never wear black gloves. I mean, never. After all, and I never eat lunch. But I offer to go, if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye.
Scrooge knew the men and looked toward the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view.
Hey, old boy, how are you?
Oh, how are you?
Well, old Scratch has got his own at last, eh?
Oh, so I'm told. Cold, isn't it?
Well, seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose.
Oh, God, no, heavens no. There's something else to think of. Good morning.
Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its horribly bad repute. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other.
Look here, old Joe. Here's a chance. If we all haven't three met here without meaning it.
We couldn't have met in a better place. Come on into the parlor. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Oh, how it shrieks. There ain't no such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe. And I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. Well, we're all suitable to our calling, well matched. Come on into the parlor.
The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again.
Well, what odds then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber? Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did.
That's true indeed, no man more so.
Why then don't stand there staring as if you was afraid, woman? Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose.
No, indeed. We should hope not.
Well, very well then. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
No, indeed.
Well, if he wanted to keep them after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself.
It's the truest word that ever was spoke. It's a judgment on him.
I wish it was a little heavier judgment, and it should have been. You may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe.
That's your account, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was boiled for not doing it. Who's next?
Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner.
I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself. Well, that's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent being so liberal and knock off half a crown.
Now undo my bundle, Joe.
What do you call this? Bed curtains?
Yeah, bed curtains.
You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him alive
Well,
there?
yes, I do. Why not?
Well, you were born to make your fortune, and you'll certainly do it one way or the other.
Well, I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now.
His blankets?
Well, whose else do you think? It isn't likely to take cold without them, I dare say.
I hope he didn't die of anything catching.
Oh, don't you be afraid of that. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter around him for such a things if he did. You may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me.
Well, what do you call wasting it?
Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure. Someone was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in pure horror.
This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. The cover was carelessly adjusted, that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side.
O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy domain. But of the loved, revered, and honored head thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true. The heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse of a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the womb, to sow the world with life immortal.
Scrooge thought if this man could be raised up now, what would his foremost thoughts be? Avarice, hard-dealing, griping cares? They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. Let us go. Please, I understand you. And I would do it if I could. But I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, Spirit. Please, I beseech you.
The ghost conducted him through several streets, familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child, and he set him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the Spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face.
The color hurts my eyes. They're better now. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time.
Well, past it, rather. I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother.
You know, I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
And so have I, often.
You know, but he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. There's your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father, don't be grieved."
Sunday. You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My precious little child.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down on it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and went down again quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked
just a little down, you know, on which, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you've ever heard. I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, and heartily sorry for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, and that's where I live. Pray come to me. Now, it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way. That was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had actually known our Tiny Tim and felt with us.
I'm sure he's a good soul.
You would be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be all surprised. Mark what I say. If he got Peter a better situation...
Only hear that, Peter!
It's just not likely as not as one of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure that we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or first parting that there was ever among us.
Never,
No,
Father.
Never.
And I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
No, never, Father.
I am very happy. I'm very happy.
Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him. And Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him, as before, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on as to the end just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment.
These courts through which we hurry now is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come.
The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere.
But the house is yonder. Why do you point away?
Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look round before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much bearing, fat with repleted appetite, a worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced towards it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape.
Before I draw near to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if preserved in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with that which you show me.
Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and, following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name.
Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, Spirit. Oh, no. Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. But for this intercourse, why show me this if I am past all hope? Good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life, please. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that somehow I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Scrooge held up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed. He saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees. Oh, Jacob, I say it on my knees.
His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance.
I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy, and I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Whoa, hello.
He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there perfectly winded.
Oh, there's the saucepan that the gruel was in. There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened.
Really, for a man who'd been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh. The father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs.
I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. Oh, I'm quite a baby. Oh, never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello. Hello. Glorious. Glorious.
Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly skies, sweet, fresh air, merry bells.
Oh, glorious. Glorious. What's today?
Calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes who perhaps had loitered in to look about him.
What?
What's today, my fine young fellow?
Today? Why, Christmas Day.
Oh, it's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Well, of course, they can do anything they want. Of course they can. Of course they can. Oh, my fine fellow.
What are you talking about?
Okay, do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?
I should hope I did.
Oh, an intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Oh, do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? And not that little prize turkey, the big one.
What, the one as big as me?
Oh, what a delightful little boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck.
It's hanging there now.
Is it? Good. Go and buy it.
Yeah, right.
No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I might give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I will give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have got a shot off half so fast.
Oh, yes. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. You shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye.
Oh, I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. Oh, it's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello. How are you? Merry Christmas.
It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them off short in a minute like sticks of sealing wax.
Why, you know, it's impossible for you to carry that to Camden Town. I must buy you a cab.
The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. He dressed himself all in his best and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir, a Merry Christmas to you." He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe?" It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands.
Oh, my dear sir, how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was so very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir.
Mr. Scrooge.
Yes, that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness of receiving this contribution?
Lord bless me. My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? This much?
If you please, and not a farthing less. 10 times that. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?
My dear sir, I don't know what to say to such generosity.
Don't say anything. Please, come and see me. Will you please come and see me?
I will.
And thank you. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times over. Bless you.
He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it.
Is your master home, sir?
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my dear?
He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please.
Thank you. He knows me. I'll go in here now myself. Fred?
Why, bless my soul. Who's that?
It's me, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Fred let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he'd set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1/4 past, no Bob. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello, what do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. I'm behind my time.
You think? Yes, as a matter of fact, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer.
And therefore, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again.
And therefore, my friend, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him it, and calling to the people in court for help in a straitjacket.
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset, and knowing that such thieves would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further encounters with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that truly be said of all of us. And so as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone.
Thank you for being a part of WKY's live presentation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Dickens once said, It's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. From our family to your family, a very Merry Christmas, and God bless us, everyone.